Hello and welcome to Chiff Chat, the organ podcast with me, Ben Blore. And would you look at that, we're now up to episode 5. I know, I'm as shocked as you are. I've really enjoyed making all these episodes, but had a particularly good time on today's one. As you'll hear, it's so full of stories and anecdotes. It's basically an episode of Jack and Ori, and I can't believe I'm making that kind of reference. That's well before even my time. But let's start today by checking the old inbox. podcast@chiffchat.com if you'd like to email in with any questions or observations. Don't forget next week is the final episode, so it'll be your last chance to bother me. I've got an email from Tim here. Many congratulations on your podcast series so far. I've listened to all 4 that have been released so far and enjoyed them hugely. Cheers, Tim. After the Martin Baker one, you talked about maybe going over to use a tablet instead of sheet music. I've had an iPad Pro for about 3 years now and have used it increasingly for reading organ music. One of the potential downsides you mentioned was dropping it. And in fact, the other week I knocked it off the organ bench and it fell down and bounced off a couple of large wooden steps onto a ceramic tiled floor. I was mortified, but actually it was totally unaffected and no damage was done at all. I found that using 4Score has been really helpful, although I do keep losing my electronic pencils and writing on the scores with my finger isn't very satisfactory. Keep up the good work with the podcasts. Well, thanks for writing in, Tim. That must have been a scary couple of seconds when you dropped it, but I'm glad it survived. I think the electronic pencil thing is one aspect that really puts me off converting, to be honest. The thought of spending 70 quid on what is essentially a slightly fancier version of a drawing stick, I don't know, it just doesn't sit right with my stingy, penny-pinching Midlands upbringing. Steve Jobs really saw us coming, didn't he, when he thought up that ruse? On the subject of this whole iPad reading music thing, I remember in a Year 8 English class, our homework one week was to come up with an invention and present it to the class in a sort of Dragon's Den Shark Tank type exercise. And I actually came up with a little computer screen where you could read your music from in order to alleviate the need for a page turner. And the teacher thought it was a brilliant idea, so thanks, Mr. Foley. But I distinctly remember the whole of the rest of the class laughed and said it was stupid because it was so niche and it would never take off. So it just goes to show, a good idea is a good idea, no matter how implausible. Also, what do kids know? One of the kids who was laughing pitched the idea of diet water, so honestly, the audacity. This is exciting. We've had David, a real-life organ builder, email in. He says, I don't know if you've already done this, not being psychic. Oh, don't put yourself down, David. But may I tentatively suggest that you interview an organ builder or 2 for later in the series? I would actually love to do that. If there's ever a series 2, I'll certainly bear that in mind. That organ stop name game we did in week 1 has really captured the heart of the nation. David continues, as for stop names, I have a good one for P. Pyrocorax Tomi. It's a stop I installed at Portsmouth Cathedral, St. Thomas's, which is just a nightingale effect but called Thomas's cough, pronounced chuff. Oh, I should have read that bit first. Because of some link between St. Thomas and that particular bird. Well, thanks, David. I played at Portsmouth Cathedral fairly recently, and I did notice that stop. It's certainly a unique name. Perhaps Chiff Chat can undergo a bit of rebranding and have the Chuff as its mascot. Chuff Chat, Chiff Chuff, Chiff Chuff Chat. Right, I better stop. The men in white coats will be here any minute. And now, a story. Once upon a time, 2 men sat in a room and talked about organs for around an hour. Luckily, depending on your definition of that word, there was a microphone in that room, and this is a little bit what it might have sounded like. Hello, welcome. You've made it onto the podcasty bit of the podcast. You're looking very nice today. I love what you've done with your hair. Today's special guest is the Director of Music at St Mary's Bourne Street, having previously been Fellow and Director of Music at Jesus College, Cambridge, and Assistant Director of Music at St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. He's a fantastic choir trainer, organist, and probably one of the nicest people around. It's Richard Pinel.
Hi, Ben.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks. This might date the recording a bit, but we've just entered the start of carol service season. We've only just tipped into December, and I'm on carol service number 4.
Oh, you're beating me
already. Are you feeling festive yet?
No, I'm not. I've only had one, and I'm still thoroughly bar humbug about it all.
I had to do one on my birthday last night, so I'm feeling a bit sort of peeved by that. I kind of hate that the go-to Advent hymn is Lo, He Comes with Clouds Descending.
Oh, I love that one.
Really?
It's my favourite one.
Do. I don't get it. I feel like it's a spicy take, but it's too long, there's a lot of repetition, it's big range that never sounds good with congregation. I also think that Hark the Herald is better than O Come All Ye Faithful.
Yeah, it's a bit too high for most people though, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, it's undoubtedly a lucrative time, this time of year for our type. What are your go-to Christmas voluntaries?
Ooh. So yesterday was my first carol service, and I tried to keep it Adventy because I just couldn't bring myself to go full on Christmas. So they had Barks Nuncom BWV 659 and Vakitau from the Schubler chorales. I did, however, give them the little Indolci Jubilo. Although actually nobody was listening, so I can pretend that it didn't happen.
So the carol service I played at last night, I just find them really performative when there's all these people who never really go to church. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but they started talking in bar 2 as a voluntary, and I thought that's a new record, surely.
Oh, well, this congregation didn't stop talking for the entire service. At one point, the chap who was conducting the choir shushed them all so the priest could do a prayer.
It's bad, isn't it?
Yeah.
We'll be over soon. So we first met when I got the organ scholarship at St George's, Windsor, which I did in my gap year between school and university, when you were assistant director of music there. And that was a really good year for me, musically and socially, and in no small part to your friendship and your cooking.
Oh,
still remember one of the nicest dishes I've ever had was a vegetable moussaka you made. Aubergine, I think it was.
Yeah,
really nice.
That was a nice recipe. It's funny because I remember you for your cooking as well. I think on about your second day, I think my doorbell rang and I opened the door and there you were, having made Angel Delight.
Oh, good memory. Yeah, crikey.
Yeah, I also enjoyed that year very much because you could already do it all. So I kind of landed most of the playing on you and I just kind of sat back and had an easy year.
I don't know, I learned a lot. I think gap year organ scholarships are such a good scheme. I think, everyone's a winner. Music departments get a young, really enthusiastic musician who wants to impress, and the scholar gets a dunking into the daily routine of professional music making. Did you do a gap year?
I didn't actually. I went straight up to university, but I did a post-university sort of gap year. I went to St George's Cathedral in Perth in Western Australia.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't so much an organ scholarship as a kind of full-time member of the team. So there was the director of music and me, and so I did all of the playing, but it was just a Sunday job in a way. We had a couple of choir rehearsals during the week and 2 Sunday morning services and Sunday evensong, so it wasn't a kind of daily evensong thing.
That sounds quite relaxed.
So yeah, it was good. It meant that I could kind of do all of the growing up that I hadn't done at university, experience a different part of the world and keep my playing just about going. Yeah. And I learned quite a bit about delicious Australian wine as well.
Good. Always useful. Well, I really learned a lot in Windsor because the organ scholar there lives in the Horseshoe Cloister alongside the Lay Clarks, and making music in that amazing building with that fantastic choir and of course the Harrison and Harrison organ, which surrounds you as you sit in the centre of the building in that enormous loft, which surely must be one of the biggest lofts in the country, would you say?
Yeah, it's not as big as the one at Westminster Abbey.
Westminster Abbey is fairly large.
But I can't think of any other really spacious organ lofts.
What are the smallest ones? Wells is pretty tiny.
Would be my...
Rochester's pretty...
I've not been small, up there.
Yeah.
And Ripon's not enormous, I seem to remember.
Oh yeah, but you do have the little hand to keep you...
keep you amused.
Company. Probably ought to quickly explain that's nothing dodgy. It's just an old wooden hand that sticks out the side of the woodwork into the choir stalls, and it's on a lever so the organist can use it to keep the beat if the conductor's away. Well, one of the biggest days in Windsor is Garter Day, when all the knights in the Garter show up. The monarch's there, quite a lot of princes and princesses, various royalty and bigwigs. I remember you played the Le Maire transcription of the Meistersingers at the end of my year.
Oh, I love that piece.
It was brilliant, fantastic. Without opening too big of a can of worms, what are your thoughts on organ transcriptions?
It is a big can of worms. Some people are, as you know, vehemently against them because it's not kind of real, pure organ music. I think they have an important place in the repertoire, and it seems to me that if you look at the big organ competitions around the world, that they're starting to kind of take a sensible place in the repertoire. So Le Maire did lots and lots of big orchestral transcriptions, particularly of bits of Wagner operas. But there's a whole tradition of that sort of thing. And back at the turn of the 20th century, it's very difficult for the kind of average Joe to go and hear the big new orchestral works or the important orchestral repertoire. They couldn't just switch on the radio. They didn't have £5 promming tickets, etc., etc. So one of the ways that they'd get to know all of this wonderful music was to go and hear the organist at the town hall playing transcriptions and doing their best to imitate all of the instruments of the orchestra. And I think that, whilst that is perhaps no longer necessary for the dissemination of the great orchestral music, it's an important thing that kind of, I guess, led into the theatre organ tradition, which obviously kind of has a big link with kind of lighter music and so forth. So I think it's important. There are undoubtedly some transcriptions that are more successful than others, but I enjoy playing them to a certain extent. They kind of challenge you with how you use the instrument, how they use the organ to try and make it sound orchestral. And whilst I don't play huge numbers of them, I certainly wouldn't be without them. They're an important part of my repertoire, I think.
You've got to have often quite big thumbs to sort of thumb down onto a different keyboard and all that kind of stuff. I did a transcription recently of some Poulenc and tried not to do all that gimmicky thumb down stuff, but rather just make it about the music more than the acrobatics of managing a big organ. Yeah,
I can see the sense in that. Perhaps with the more romantic side of things, it is all about the orchestral colour. So the acrobatics are there. And of course, depending on the music, you might have a texture that just requires several different things going on at once.
Yeah. You mentioned competitions there. I mean, could I just pick your brains about competitions for a little bit?
So I'm an expert.
I know you've had success in Reger in the Netherlands, and you've been in for the Canada competition as well. What is it about competitions that was sort of really alluring for you?
At the time, I mean, I'd always kind of pigeonholed myself as an accompanist, as a liturgical organist, and I certainly get a lot of pleasure out of doing that. I'd never studied at music college. I'd gone to university and held an organ scholarship that involved accompanying a choir every day, and that's what I loved doing. That's really what I'd learnt to do well as a teenager as well. And repertoire was really just limited to the odd lunchtime recital and some voluntaries and some big voluntaries, and the whole music college tradition of being able to do many hours practice a day and just focus on your repertoire was completely foreign to me. And it was one year when the St Albans International Organ Competition was going on. I was in Windsor at the time, and I knew several people that were competing, and I went along to the final, and actually a good friend of mine won it, deservedly so. And I just thought, well, hang on a minute, whilst I wouldn't think that I could perhaps win one of these things, I realised that I could improve my repertoire playing and take it a bit more seriously. So I went and I contacted my former organ teacher, Henry Fairs, who at the time was head of organ at Birmingham Conservatoire, as it was called then, and went and said to him, look, I think I'm missing something here. I'd really like to spend a bit of time focusing on my repertoire. That may even have been during your year at Windsor, actually.
Could have been.
I think it was a case of I've got an organ scholar that can do my job for me, so I could make good use of the extra time. And Henry is wonderful, and he said, well, yeah, absolutely, come on board at Birmingham Conservatoire. So I signed up for the PSP, the Personal Study Programme, which is as you know, Ben, is not a degree. You don't get a bit of paper at the end of it, but you get access to the full Conservatoire facilities, and crucially, fantastic tuition from Henry. And so I did that, and he said, well, actually, as you're coming up every couple of weeks or so, why don't you do a bit of work with the undergrads on liturgical playing? And that was a lovely arrangement we had. It gave me some fantastic teaching experience, and Henry was extremely generous with his time and expertise, and kind of lit a bit of a fire within me to try and see where I could get with the repertoire playing. Competitions themselves, I mean, they're a funny thing. Often they say that the winner is the person that annoys the jury the least, right? Because if you're playing with a massive personality, you're likely to polarize people, and then half the jury might love it, but the other half won't. And I
think that's part of why I like them, just because you can listen to your peers and either discover some new repertoire or listen to different interpretations of pieces you know quite well, that kind of thing. But agreed, it's often the bigger personalities that can fall by the wayside.
Yeah, but then perhaps become the most successful players.
Possibly, yeah.
And you've touched on something that I find quite exciting about competitions, and I participated in one in the Netherlands in Breda, and I was the only British organist there, but there were some Dutch organists, some German organists, a Russian organist, a Korean organist, I think. I forget how many of us were in for it. And some of the repertoire was set, some of it was own choice. And I suddenly heard all of these, particularly in the first round when everybody was still in the running, playing the same repertoire, heard this music played, let's say 12, if you include me, very different ways, but equally interesting and fantastic ways. And it was a kind of Damascus moment, because I realised that, you know, we have our tradition of organ playing in this country, which is great, and I love it, and I guess I'm part of it. But it's not the only way to do things. And I found this elsewhere. I spent a good deal of time this last summer sitting in on the competition round at St Albans, and found the same thing again. You've got these fantastic different national traditions of playing, and it's so enriching to hear that and take something from it that I might try myself, or think, well, actually, no, that doesn't work. I prefer my way. But it kind of keeps your interpretation fresh and part of a bigger picture.
Agreed. Yeah. I mean, mentally, it's quite a lot to ask of the competitors, isn't it? To focus on a certain amount of pieces for 6 months at a time. I mean, you basically play nothing else, don't you?
Yeah.
I mean, some pieces seem to crop up on a lot of competition programs more than others. So, like the first movement of Vidor 5 is a big one, which I still don't play. Actually,
I need
to learn it. I know.
Great.
I know. Right, so just going back to Windsor. So that's by no means the only big high pressure job you've had.
Probably the most pressurised job I've had.
How did you cope with the big services like Garter Day?
I think it helped being relatively young. I was 25 when I went there, and perhaps thought I knew it all. Therefore, didn't feel the pressure in quite the same way that I would if I was doing it now, for example. Also, and I've spoken with colleagues about this as well, I tried, by and largely successfully, to just maintain a standard of playing all of the time, so that I didn't have to step up for Garter Day or radio broadcast. If you just keep it there, then you're just doing what you do. And certainly these days, I occasionally suffer from nerves in the way that I'm sure everyone does. But there, of course, it was my home turf. I spent hours playing that organ every day. I liked the fact that in the organ loft you couldn't really be seen. Yeah. You mentioned earlier that you're kind of sitting right in the middle of all of the pipes, and so as soon as you step out of the organ loft, the acoustic, even when the chapel's full, kind of blend the sounds together a little bit. So it always sounds better downstairs than it does in the organ loft. So if I feel like I'm playing to a half-decent, or if I felt as though I was playing to a half-decent standard, from what I could hear in the organ loft, I knew that it would sound better downstairs, and was kind of confident within that. And then just a bit of adrenaline. I also had this slightly bizarre habit that I fell into. I'm a great procrastinator, which I think is one of the things you learn as an Oxford organ scholar. When I had a big service to play, say a radio broadcast or whatever, I'd suddenly find myself learning a very difficult piece of big repertoire that wasn't for that service, and that was my way of procrastinating. But the point being, kind of have something that takes your mind off it. Yeah. Garter Day was another funny case in point, because you'll remember our choir practice with the brass up in the organ loft was at about 8 o'clock in the morning until 8:30, or 8:30 till 9, something like that. And then everyone was booted out of the chapel whilst the sniffer dogs went around, and the flower ladies made sure the flowers were looking great. But we then had a huge gap until the pre-service music started at about 2 p.m. I forget the exact time. And
a lot of time to get in your own head, isn't it?
Well, exactly. So yeah, I could have gone and sat at home and played my piano till smoke was coming out of it, or what I actually did was make lunch for about 20 people. This is a whole operation that started a couple of days before. But by hosting all of those people and making sure that they've got enough food and having a good time, it does take your mind off it. Because actually the musical content in that service was fairly straightforward. I seem to remember it was a hymn and a Te Deum and an anthem that may or may not be accompanied, and a voluntary at the end, and then lots of music whilst people process. So it wasn't like playing a big organ concerto or a big solo recital in Westminster Abbey or something.
Yeah. I want to ask you a little bit about St Albans as well, because you were organ scholar there?
I was organ scholar there for 2 years when I got back from Australia.
I spent a bit of time there recently because I was in the organ competition, and I really enjoyed the organ. It's a bit like the oratory, but sort of a bit bigger with a cymbal stand.
Yeah, it's different now from when I was there. So I was there from 2006 to 2008, and at the halfway point, summer 2007, the organ went on holiday to Durham, to Harrison and Harrison's workshop, which is where it was built. And so for my second year there, we had electronic instruments. So the organ that I got to know very well in my first year was, I think, even more similar to the oratory organ. It's been kind of smoothed out slightly. It hasn't kind of killed the Rafe Downs ethos. It's, I think, made it even more useful. You always had to, and you still have to, really use your ears and work hard to make it sound good. It's very easy to make that organ sound bad, but actually, if you do take the time and have your ears kind of fully switched on, it can also sound absolutely amazing. And I think pretty much any repertoire. It's so versatile. When it was put back in, along with its new cymbal stand, David Higgs gave the opening recital, and I think he said that he thought it was the best example of the American classic organ, which is quite strange given that it's by the kind of Rolls-Royce English builder. But I think that American classic organ tradition was always striving to build something that could, play the earlier side of things relatively convincingly, but also all of the orchestral romantic repertoire. And I think St Albans really can do that.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's why it's such a good competition organ, I suppose. It's reminded me of a story of the first time I drove to St Albans, and I got to the M25 and there was a lot of traffic, and I thought, okay, that's pretty typical. But later on I looked in the news, and it turns out some lady had fallen out of a passenger window because she was taking a selfie.
All the list of things not to do in the car.
Yeah, quite. So now you're director of music at St Mary's Bourne Street with that fantastic organ there, and we did some duets on it recently. Well, we had a playthrough.
We had a sesh, yeah. It's a lovely place to work. Fantastic organ, and I'm looking forward to playing more duets with you there and elsewhere. It's perhaps the pinnacle of the Anglo-Catholic tradition in terms of the style of worship, the style of liturgy. In fact, back in, I think, the 1920s and 30s, I haven't got my dates clear in my head, there was a deputation from St Mary's Bourne Street to Rome to try and see about healing the schism between the Church of England and the Roman Catholic Church. Obviously, it wasn't successful, but that perhaps gives you a flavour of the sort of place that it was and still is. So playing chant in English rather than Latin is a really integral part of our services. There's an English gradual, which is a contrafactum of the Roman one. So the tunes are the same, the words are different, which we start on page 1 on Advent Sunday, and then get to the back page the week before Advent Sunday, and so it's very much in that Catholic tradition. We have benediction every week, and you'd be forgiven if you walked in from what you see and what you smell and what you hear for thinking it might be a Roman Catholic church, but actually it in some fundamental ways it is also rooted in the Anglican tradition. So Anglo-Catholic is the word; it's not kind of wannabe Roman.
Sure, I find that really fascinating. The contrafactum of English words onto neumes and things. I mean, does it change the placement of accents in the music or anything? Or
I think whoever did it did a pretty good job. Occasionally we have a long, beautiful melisma on the word "and" or something, and of course, then if you look at the Latin version, it makes a bit more sense for there to be a melisma in that place.
Yeah.
But usually it works and makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And otherwise, you're freelance, right? How are you finding that?
Yeah, I'm loving it. I haven't looked back. So I've been fully freelance really since Christmas, although I actually had a sabbatical from my previous job for the whole of the Michaelmas term. So kind of started dipping my toe in the water. And it's worked out very well for me. I've been really fortunate. I was fortunate that St Mary's came up when it did and that I got the job. And so that's kind of one portion of what I do. It's a Sunday job plus the high days and holy days. So I've been doing a bit more organ teaching. So I do a day a week in a school and half a day a week at the Royal Academy, which I really love, and I love the fact that it isn't my entire being as well. Mm-hmm. And the rest of the time it really varies. Sometimes I sit and practice the organ and cook, and sometimes I play carol services, or it's really whatever. But crucially, I've got time to plan and do my own thing and think of projects and get back into practice, because I felt that I'd fallen out of practice for the last few years before I left Cambridge.
So good. I mean, one of the benefits, I suppose, is that you can say yes to recitals, any recital you like. This isn't really something we've touched on a lot in this podcast, but it's easy to forget that organists get access to some amazing places.
Oh, yeah.
Often they're locked in historic buildings all on their own to practice. I got locked in Westminster Cathedral on Christmas Eve. I told you this. No, it was Christmas Day in the evening. I think I had nothing else to do, so I went and did some practice, and it was quite late at night, midnight or 1 o'clock or something. And I left my phone on the organ and then went back to my room. And then realised when I got back to my room, didn't have it. So I went back to the loft and didn't have my access card with me, and I didn't feel like ringing any priests at that time in the morning. So they found me. They found me in the morning.
Oh no!
It was really scary, sort of, sleeping in a place where the only other people are the corpses of long gone priests.
I bet. Blimey. It's funny you mentioned Westminster Cathedral as your example of that, because the first experience I had of being locked in a building by myself to practice, I wasn't stuck in there, was there.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and
they've got a really complicated alarm system now, so it's probably before.
Yeah, this is a while ago. But I did my practice, set up the music I was playing for a recital the next day, and had a bit of time left, and the Turin Shroud was on a grand tour and was just downstairs in Westminster Cathedral. So I kind of went downstairs and enjoyed looking at it all by myself, and it was just amazing to be kind of
cool.
alone, in such close proximity to something so kind of iconic. I'm so fortunate. The other one just this summer that was amazing was Antwerp Cathedral, where they've got this fantastic large romantic organ on the West Gallery, and the console is turn around, so you sit facing east. I guess so. If you're kind of playing for mass, you can just see what's going on and cater your improvising accordingly. But above the high altar is one of Rubens' most important paintings, I think, of the Assumption. And so I was sitting there practicing Vienn's Third Symphony with this direct view of one of the world's great paintings in this empty, enormous, exciting building, and it's such a privilege.
It's incredible, isn't it? Yeah. I don't know why it seems to be story time today, but I've remembered something else. The worst attended recital I gave was somewhere quite well to do in London, and there were two people in the audience. Where one of them left halfway through, and the other one was an old lady with loads of sort of rustly plastic bags that was sort of eating yogurt. And I'm pretty sure she left near the end too. But
so it was just you?
Just me, yeah. I imagine you have lots of weddings and funerals as well? Or as many as you care to?
Yeah, St Mary's seems to do death more than marriage, so we've had quite a few funerals since I've been there, and only one wedding.
Listeners may not know that Richard actually played the organ for my wedding. Very good it was too. I find it slightly strange playing for a friend's wedding. You're on professional sort of mode, and then you go to being a guest. It's a bit odd. And I suppose it's better that way around than being a DJ and having to do your work at the end of the night.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love it, actually.
It's nice, yeah. Obviously, it's brilliant. My wife is a bit musical. We sung in choirs together when we were younger, but she wouldn't call herself a musician. But she had a few old friends from school who got married a few years ago, and they asked her to play the piano for their first dance.
Yeah.
And she said, Ben's a professional musician, right? And they said, no, but it would be really special if you could play. So she was massively stressed, but I had a brilliant time. That same wedding, there was... where are these stories coming from? Sorry. It's meant to be about you. The same wedding, it was a tiny village church, and they booked their own organist, and he did a really good job. But during the signing of the registers, as you know, you have to sort of improvise to cover cover that he can take a long time. But when he got the signal to stop, he just took his hands off the keys. There's no cadence at all. It was brilliant. It was really funny.
So you spent the rest of the day marred in structural dissonance.
I know, yeah. I felt unresolved, yeah. So to cap off this section, we're going to have some quick fire questions.
Yep.
These are the same for my guest each week, but the answers are often different because the people who answer are different. Right, Richard, here we go. Favourite organ?
Can I have two?
No.
Okay, the Lawrence Kirk in Alkmaar.
Okay, what would the other one be?
St Paul's Cathedral.
Really? Okay. I've mixed feelings about that one. I wonder if I could work there because of the echo.
Yeah, I think it's
an amazing instrument,
tricky.
No doubt.
Yeah.
Favourite organ composer?
Bach. It's got to be Bach.
Yeah, no one ever says John Stanley. Favourite performer, alive or dead?
At the moment, Johann Vexo, who one of the choir organists at Notre Dame. And I went to his recital at Westminster Cathedral a few weeks ago, and I think it's the best organ playing I've ever heard. It's absolutely amazing.
Favourite recording?
So this harks back from my teenage years, and it's that 3 CD set of Pierre Cochereau improvising L'Organiste de Notre Dame, or whatever it's called, and that kind of opened my ears to a new sound world, and just the fact that people could improvise in that way, rather than pre-even song, left foot on bottom C waffle, which is basically all I can do. But I just found that so thrilling and exciting, and I don't think I've listened to it for about 20 years, but I think that probably still has to be the one.
Composer who never composed any organ music, but you wish they had?
Stravinsky. And I know there are a couple of transcriptions, but he hated the organ.
You're not the only one to say that, actually.
Really?
Yeah, no, it is a common thing. I was mentioning to someone else the Mass for Wind, which we had to play at New College, and it's a miserable experience.
Yes, it really is, yeah.
Cave Cole or Harrison and Harrison?
If you held a gun to my head, I'd have to say Cave Cole.
Even song or mass?
Even song. Don't tell my boss.
Okay. There's a lot of good music for both, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I do miss playing, various bits of
music on 5 lines.
Yeah, yeah, quite. Vidor or Vienne?
This, I think, was the most difficult of the questions you gave me, but I think I'm going to say Vienne today.
Okay, today.
Yeah.
Reger or Cargelert?
Reger.
Disappointingly quick answer from you there, Richard. Howells or Stanford?
Howells. Although Stanford knows how to write a tune.
He does.
Like almost nobody else.
Bach or Messiaen?
Bach.
Okay, quick answer. And then finally, socks or shoes?
Shoes these days. Used to be socks.
It did, didn't it?
Yeah.
You inspired me to go shoeless.
I just got one too many splinters in the end.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Now it's time for our regular item, Organ Heaven and Organ Hell, which gives me the chance to ask my guest what tunes are going to be playing when we reach that great big organ recital in the sky, and also what music gets scraped off the underside of your shoe and scowled at. So Richard, first of all, what have you picked for your Organ Heaven and why?
So I've picked Reger's Chorale Fantasia on Halleluja Gott zu loben. Many reasons. I love his music generally, the kind of emotional extremes, kind of extremes in every direction, sonic dynamics and virtuosity, but actually the virtuosity is not the point of the music. And Hallelujah in particular, I think it's actually one of his more accessible large-scale pieces as a listener. And I love the way that it's kind of unrelentingly joyful for, it's about 20 minutes, isn't it? Or just shy of 20 minutes. It's unrelentingly joyful, and the whole music just shines for me. And I think if everything was that happy, the world would be a better place.
I don't know if I've mentioned this once or twice, but I don't really get on with Maxi Boy.
But you like Cargelert, don't you?
I do, yeah. Well, I find it, I don't know, I just don't see how Reger is touted as being above Cargelert. For me, Cargelert is much more colourful and inventive, but still within that distinctive German romantic style. But he's just got so much more to say.
Do you think?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's have a bust up about this.
No. And I love bits of
I'm sure the problem lies with me. I just don't get it. I did give Hallelujah a fair shake. I listened to a few recordings. Mm-hmm. It's quite long. It's about 20 minutes, as you say. I got about 10 minutes through one recording and checked how long it had been, and it said 4 minutes. So if there are any scientists listening who want to conduct some experiments around relativity and time wormholes, then look no further. I mean, I suppose I should say something I like about it. I like the tune, I suppose. So
he didn't write that.
Well done, Reger, for picking it. There's a nice middle bit, which is, it's a little quiet bit.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I think that's really nice. But the fugue looks pretty evil, all those pedal trills. And I think at one point you have to trill in 3 out of 5 voices or something mad like that.
Something like that.
You just had no chill whatsoever.
Yeah, but it's so exciting. And I think it's the kind of piece that, however well you play it, you can always play it better. So it kind of ignites a bit of kind of personal competition.
Well, yeah, I mean, as I say, this podcast is meant to be about you, but it's quite cathartic for me getting this off my chest. But I suppose my real gripe with it is, it's a word you've used, it's so unrelenting. And while you might say it's unrelentingly joyful, I just find it so heavy going. I don't know. I mean, I've heard it being compared to climbing Everest, but my question, I suppose, is the joy and the satisfaction of conquering something massive, or is there any musical merit to it as well? I
think it's definitely a bit of both. Conquering Everest is definitely part of it. But I have to say that moment in the fugue when you finally get the chorale subject come back in the pedals after probably a little bit too much G major, and then finally he just kind of tips his cap towards D major, and then it comes back. I just find it absolutely thrilling. And then the final page, when you think the harmony can't get any more kind of out there, he somehow manages to find an extra bit of dissonance, and it's and then of course it all resolves beautifully. I'm well aware that a lot of Reger is perhaps more enjoyable for the performer than the listener.
It's exciting, no doubt. No, it's it's that sort of God complex of being in control of this massive instrument. With, 11 parts under 10 fingers kind of thing.
That's true. But the flip side of it, when you have a piece such as that, there are also moments, you touched on it, the quiet middle section where you perhaps just have a single stop. So it's those extremes. So I almost gave as my organ heaven the Reger sonata, because that's perhaps uses that end of the extreme even more. There are these moments where you just have a single stop, and because it's just come out of a humongous diminuendo from the entire instrument, you've got the audience in absolute silence, and you can feel the audience's attention, you can feel the kind of tension in the room, and yet you're playing as quietly as possible. And so I also love that about it.
I get it, yeah. But I suppose as well, trying to play Reger on an English organ is never particularly satisfactory if you've not got your Rollschwelle there.
No, that's true. Although, I mean, the Rollschwelles that Reger knew didn't have that many stages on them, so I'm not sure kind of how smooth a crescendo they would be by themselves. I think you'd still need somebody to pull the odd stuff.
Now, Richard, I'm going to give you carte blanche to be as mean as you like about another organ work. What's your idea of hell?
So I found this very difficult to answer, and I was grateful for the forewarning. So the one side of organ music that I really dislike, because it doesn't speak to me, and I don't think it really does the cause of organs and organ music any good, is music that is kind of atonal for the sake of it, and that doesn't have any sort of kind of development or structure that is audible to the listener. So whether that be harmonic direction that kind of takes you on a journey and you feel satisfied when you get the resolution at the end of it, or if you can, say a set of variations or something where you can hear something happening. Organ music is not the most popular genre of music, not the most popular instrument, because people see us as either kind of stuck in the church, hidden up in the organ loft. You can't see the performer often. It's just a great big noise. It can be too loud and therefore not enjoyable to someone that doesn't already like it. And I think that the sort of music I've described really doesn't help the cause. Whereas I think if someone plays a bit of Bach really beautifully, if somebody doesn't like that, then they're the lost cause, not organ music, and plenty of other composers' stuff as well. Even the Vida Toccata is great. People say, "Oh, I love that. I had it at my wedding," but that's people like it for a reason. You can hear what's going on. So I've had to kind of give you a piece to encapsulate that for me, and so I've gone for Fernie Ho's Sieben Stern. I don't have anything in particular against that man or that piece. But you wanted a piece to encapsulate what I dislike the most about organ music. So there you are.
Thank you. If I'm going to learn something modern, I try and make sure it's got some sort of grounding in tonality.
Yeah.
Even if it's not traditionally tuneful. I understand where you're coming from here, and I think a lot of people would as well. I suppose the whole point of Fernie Ho, I ought to get it right, he's still alive, isn't he? Yeah.
Sorry, Brian.
The whole point is that it's meant to be hyper complex, isn't it? So it's it's really densely written, and the challenge is trying to make sense of the music through the thicket of clusters and polyrhythms.
Yeah.
And so by that metric, I suppose it shares some DNA with Reger in that it's a bit like scaling a mountain. The individuals who decide to tackle it will be rewarded with a sense of satisfaction upon completion, but maybe not much else.
Yeah, I'm always happy to be proved wrong, but it's the sort of piece that if it comes on the radio, I turn it off. If I see it on an organ recital programme before I get to go, I won't go.
Yeah. Funnily enough, I listened to a recording of this. It was Kevin Bowyer playing, obviously.
Yeah, and all credit to him. He's amazing.
Totally, yeah. I found much to my surprise that I had a far higher tolerance for listening to this than I did to Reger.
Oh, really?
I suppose with this kind of music, it leaves you guessing a bit more, and you don't really know what's around the corner, whereas with Reger, you know what to expect. It's a variation and a fugue that lasts 5 minutes too long, kind of thing.
Well, in the choral fantasias, yes, but what about some of his other big works?
Yeah, I suppose. I like the littler ones.
Yeah.
Benedictus is nice. There's that nice introduction, Passacaglia. Am I right in thinking you had a copy of Siebensterne that you used to leave around for people to find so they would be scared of you or something?
Well, no, not to be scared of it. It was when I was a young organ scholar who thought he knew it all. When we had visiting recitalists, I'd leave a copy of this on the organ, and I had some markings in it, so it looked like I was playing it, just to see if it would kind of elicit any sort of comment. It never did.
Right. So, you remember in the Carpenter's Arms?
I do very
in
well.
Windsor, or in King and Castle, we'd go and have a drink after even song, and sometimes we'd go on the quiz machine. And,
yes, I've forgotten that.
Yeah, we weren't particularly good at it. Well, we've now reached the part of the podcast where I take the role of the cold, indifferent machine who steals your money, and you take the role of the slightly tanked-up patron, hoping this time he might win his money back. Also, all the questions are about organs. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Great. So, question 1. In St. Paul's Church, Newcastle under Lyme, there is a stop on the organ called tibia liquida. When you pull this stop, what happens? A pipe gets dunked in water and makes a chirpy bird sort of noise. B, it unlocks the door to the toilet next to the loft. Or C, it opens a little compartment with various drinks inside.
It's got to be C.
It is, yeah. I've actually been to this church. I've given a recital there, yeah.
And do they keep it stopped?
They do. I remember thinking it's the coolest thing at the time. Definitely every church should have one. It's like a glorified mini bar. There's all those little sort of mixer bottles and
fabulous.
Stuff. Yeah, and it's wonderful. Didn't you play somewhere in Germany recently that had you pulled a stop out and something happened?
Oh, yes. It wasn't alcohol, sadly.
Okay.
It was Magdeburg Cathedral, the Protestant cathedral. In fact, it's not a stop, it's a secret button underneath the keyboards, and you switch the switch and this light turns on above your head and a hatch opens, and then very slowly a mechanical chicken lowers with its wings flapping. Don't ask me why. I have no idea.
Question 2. If you were to play the complete organ works of each of these composers, which one would take you the least amount of time? A. César Franck, B. Maurice de Roufflet, or C. Jean Alain?
Do you mean how long it lasts, or how long it would personally take me to learn it?
As in a performance.
Okay, so Alain, Franck, or Duraflé? Duraflé.
Correct, yeah. I was wondering if you were going to call me out on technicalities here, because Franck, I was talking about the 12 big pieces, but there are loads of...
There's a double CD of little ones.
There are, little harmonium pieces that bumps at the time. And similarly with Alain, the Marie Claire recording of the Cannes works is about 2 hours, but there's some other recordings which include other little periphery works. But Duruflé obviously has the smallest output here. And most recordings come out about 1 hour, 15 minutes, something like that.
Yeah.
But, I mean, what an amazing 75 minutes of music.
Yeah. You can't really better it, can you?
It's I think he's one of those composers, a bit like Bach, who everyone can agree on being a good egg.
He nearly came as my favourite organ composer in the earlier quiz.
I think every note means something. It's so beautifully constructed and emotionally potent,
Yeah.
Question 3. You played for a lot of high-profile services when you were assistant organist at Windsor. When I was organ scholar there in 2011, William and Kate got married, and we were all a bit relieved that it took place in Westminster Abbey rather than St George's, which meant we could all watch it on the telly. After the wedding service, the couple left the Abbey to Walton's Crown Imperial, but which famous organ piece followed this? A. Vidor Toccata, B. Cargelert nun dankit, or C. Handel Hornpipe?
Was it C, although it's not an organ piece?
It wasn't, it was A, actually, it was Vidor.
Oh, okay.
And then it was the Fifth Pomp and Circumstance March by Elgar, which I assume was played by the orchestra, although no one really stuck around for that bit, I suppose. Are you a fan of Vidor Toccata?
I am. And I think that became famous in this country, particularly as a wedding piece. Was it at Prince Margaret's wedding?
Mm-hmm. I really struggled to play the semiquavers in the left hand from about bar 2 onwards. I just don't think it's worth the RSI. It's probably my dreadful technique.
Yeah, get the Hannon out, Ben.
But I should maybe take a leaf out of Vidor's book, because he played it really slowly.
Yeah, play it at his metronome mark.
Question 4. Which organ is known as the French fries, owing to its facade of pipes sticking out at weird angles?
I can tell you without...
Go on then.
It's the one in the Walt Disney Concert Hall,
That's
isn't
correct,
it?
yeah. Well, the options were going to be the concert hall in LA, or the Cloica organ of Our Lady in the Snow in the Alps, which is an organ which looks like a hand.
I've seen pictures of that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Awesome.
And the other option was going to be the Cassavant organ in the Lewis and Clark College in Portland, which has an interesting story. So it's a building that's sort of a big cone, a bit like Liverpool Met, and they realised they couldn't really fit an organ on ground level, so the whole thing's suspended from the ceiling.
Yeah.
And the pipes are in a sort of circle. It's really strange.
Oh, wow.
It must be a nightmare to tune.
Yeah. Maybe they don't bother.
Yeah. But no, the answer is the Walt Disney Concert Hall organ, which I still can't believe there's a Disney organ
out there.
And it does look like a box of French fries,
really
supersized. The architect was Frank Gehry. It's really striking. I think I was hungry while I wrote that question. Yeah. Question 5, a bit of a strange one. This isn't multiple choice, but just a yes/no answer. There are only 2 real full-length 64 stops in the world at Sydney Town Hall and the Boardwalk Hall Auditorium, but does anywhere have a real 128-foot stop?
No.
Sure?
Yeah, they might be a resultant one.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. I think it would be impossible. I mean, bottom C on a 64-foot pipe has something like 8 hertz.
Yeah. I mean, it just sounds like someone tapping.
Exactly. It's hard to hear anything, really. A lot of organs combine a 32-foot with a 21 1/3, I think, to create a resultant tone.
Yeah. Alkmaar.
Yeah, quite. The Boardwalk Hall organ actually has a 42 2/3 stop, which you can use alongside the 64, which I suppose would give you a decent impression of a 128-foot
Yeah, perhaps.
stop.
I think you'd need a lot of organ on top of it, and it would just underpin the harmonics. Rather,
Just
you wouldn't hear the actual
gets a bit silly,
tone,
doesn't it?
would you?
I wonder if the organist is told he can't use it very often, so people don't vomit.
Yeah.
Now, today's a very special occasion because we've actually got a quick-fire bonus round to the quiz. You were organ scholar at Magdalen College in Oxford as an undergraduate, as was Anna Lapwood, who you may have heard of.
Yep.
So I thought it'd be good to pay tribute to her for shedding light on the organ via social media. So all of these questions will have something to do with Anna.
Okay.
Okay. Question 1. Which TikTok star has recently released her second solo organ album called Luna, which is all about music related to stars and the moon and stuff?
Is it Anna Lapwood?
Yes. Question 2. Which presenter hosted the opening night of the 2023 BBC Proms along with Sandy Toksvig and Clive Myrie? This one's a bit harder, so I'm going to give you some options. A. Alan Atwood. B. Anne A. Lapwood. Or C. Anna Lapwood.
Was it C?
It was. Question 3. Wooden Nanpal is an anagram of which famous organist / social media guru? If you added a few letters and don't really know how anagrams work.
Is it Anna Lapwood?
It is Anna Lapwood.
Wow.
Yeah, good. Question 4. Born in 1685 and died in 1750, who is widely considered to be the father of organ music?
J.S. Bach.
No, it's actually Anna Lapwood. Okay, question 5, last one. Who is currently the greatest living organist?
Benjamin Blore.
No, oh, that's very kind of you to say, thank you. My notes actually say Simon Lindley.
Oh, okay.
Great, okay. And with that, sadly, it's time to wrap up this podcast. It might be sad for our listeners, but we're actually going to get some food now, so it's good for us.
It's been a pleasure.
Well, thank you for joining me. Was this everything you hoped for and more?
Absolutely. Just the chance to sit here with you, Ben.
Thank you. Do you want to plug anything in particular?
No.
Good. That's nice and brief. In which case, if the Chiff Chat podcast were a book, could you give me a snappy quote for the front cover to make my publishers happy?
Ben Blore knows all about organs.
All right. Okay, let's go for that. In some parts of the world, what you just heard could be considered to be an audio delicacy. In other parts, it would be considered a passable podcast. Enormous thanks to Richard Pinel, who's a super guy, and if you've listened this far, then honestly, what's wrong with you? Go and get yourself checked in somewhere. Time for one more email before we wrap up. This one's from Toby. Hi Ben, absolutely loving your podcast at the moment. Just at the moment. Bit hurtful, Toby. I enjoy listening to it on the train and love the quirkiness and humour that can so often lack from the organ world. I'm a 14-year-old boy who's working towards his grade 8 organ and would one day love to be an organist professionally. Do you have any advice? Yeah, well, keep at it, Toby, and good luck with the grade 8. If you enjoy doing what you do, then just keep practising and being the best you can be, really. Being a realist, you don't go into being a professional organist for the money, I can tell you that. You go into it for the love of playing, spurred on by the idea that it beats sitting in an office 9 to 5 every day. I've been asked this before, and the advice I give for being a somewhat successful organist is that it basically boils down to two important things. You have to be good, and you have to be nice. One without the other just won't do. The umbrella branching out from that is, by being good, I mean, you need to make sure you're always sufficiently practiced and on top of your notes. And by being nice, I mean, you need to be able to get on with people and for people to get on with you. Thrown into the mix is being professional and always replying to emails efficiently and all that stuff. But yeah, there you go. Be good and be nice. On that note, I'd love it if you could all email in this week letting me know what you think the nicest looking organ is. We're just considering looks here, so the instrument could sound like a faulty toilet. But if it looks the part, shiny pipes, beautiful casework, interesting design, I want to know. Email in on podcast@chiffchat.com. This has been on my mind, but if this podcast ever makes it onto Series 2, I'll have to come up with some new items. What do you think of this? It's called Baroque Composer or Cultural Institution. The name needs a bit of refining. Also, the concept needs more than a bit of refining. So far, I've got Scheidemann and Spider-Man and Pachelbel and Taco Bell. I'm just not really sure what I'm meant to do with this information, but by gum, if I can squeeze even an ounce of content out of it, then you better believe I'm going to. If you're keeping up to date with the whole Barclays subplot, well, the bank has now repossessed my house, but also, sadly, about 3.5 cans of Pringles. I mean, don't worry about me, I'll be fine. I'll kip in a big 32-foot board-on pipe. But if you want to believe in the parallel universe in which this actually happened, you can donate in this universe to my tip jar page. Link is in the description. In the meantime, that's another podcast. I'd like to thank you for listening. I'd like to thank Richard for taking part. I'd like to thank the Academy for this award. I'd like to thank Barclays for nothing.